Hello everybody, thank you for watching Longshot Wargaming. Today, our wargame takes us to the sun-scorched deck of the LSW Kota Bharu, a hijacked Malaysian cargo ship. For this game, we will be using the Spectre Operations rule set. This rule set is perfect for the fast and gritty, tactical level action portrayed in this game. Let's take a look at today's combatants. Tom will be in control of the seafaring terrorist organization. For the purposes of Spectre Operations, this force will have the attributes of a militia force. Their mission is simple: maintain control of the ship in order to carry out their plan of scuttling the Kota Bharu and the Suez Canal, causing a blockage and immeasurable economic damage. The terrorist force will be equipped with a variety of weapons including carbines, assault rifles, a medium machine gun, and a rocket-propelled grenade. Rick will be in command of the Maritime Raid Force. For the purposes of Spectre Operations, the Maritime Raid Force will have the attributes of a professional force. Their mission is to gain control of the Kota Bharu, eliminate the terrorist threat, and free the captive crew. The Maritime Raid Force, affectionately referred to as MRF, is a maritime-focused special operations unit made up of recon Marines. MRF is a subordinate unit of a Marine Expeditionary Unit. With 3 Marine Expeditionary Units at sea at any given time, the Maritime Raid Force is the United States 911 force. MRF specializes in a variety of mission sets, one of the most important being VBSS, or Visit, Board, Search, and Seizure. This sometimes involves the recapturing of a hijacked vessel. To complete this mission, MRF is proficient in critical skills including fast roping, assault ladder boarding, close quarters battle, and a variety of maritime breaching techniques. The Maritime Raid Force will be equipped with a standard loadout for this type of mission. Each Marine will be armed with M4 carbines and M45A1 45 caliber pistols. Every Marine will have body armor and a ballistic helmet. Select members of the Raid Force will carry breaching tools or combat trauma bags. At 6:30 a.m. on July 11th, the LSW Kota Bharu departed the port of Antwerp for a 25-day voyage to Jakarta. The LSW Kota Bharu is a 135-meter bulk carrier owned and operated by the Malaysian shipping firm LSW. Like many other cargo vessels, the Kota Bharu is flagged in Singapore. By day 3, the crew of the Kota Bharu had fallen into the normal rhythm of life at sea. On July 17, the ship and crew make a successful southbound transit of the Suez Canal. Now, the Kota Bharu has begun the second half of the voyage to Jakarta. On July 19th, the ship passes through the large strait and into the emerald waters of the Gulf of Aden. Just as the crew was rotating onto the afternoon watch, the ship's radar gave an unexpected ping. The watch officer raised his binoculars to have a look off of the ship's port side. 2 black specks could barely be made out on the horizon line. The situation developed over the next 20 minutes. It would become clear to the seasoned captain that they were going to be boarded. In accordance with company protocol, the captain notified the Maritime Emergency Response Center. 15 minutes later, the Kota Bharu went silent. 200 miles away, the USS New Orleans was cutting squares south of Oman. With elements of the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit aboard, this was the closest vessel that could respond. Once directed by the U.S. Central Command, the captain of the USS New Orleans changed course and headed toward the Kota Bharu. Their ETA, 6 hours. The armed captors easily gained control of the Kota Bharu. Immediately, several members of the crew were thrown overboard to decrease the chances of anyone getting any heroic ideas. The terrorist leader expected a response and instructed his subordinates to spread out and stand guard on key ship spaces. On the deck, the terrorist sentries circled, keeping an eye and ear out for anyone attempting to approach the ship. Without communication equipment, the terrorist leader's command and control capabilities were severely limited. The men of the terrorist organization were barely trained, with varying degrees of dedication to the cause. Only time would tell how committed they truly were to their leader and to their mission. Several hours passed without activity. The terrorist sentries fell into a state of complacency. In the wee hours of the morning, a faint hum could be heard over the sound of the Kota Bharu's engines. 2,000 yards away, the Marines of the Maritime Raid Force gripped their weapons tightly as their ribs smashed through the waves. These Marines had rehearsed this mission hundreds of times and were ready to quickly retake the Kota Bharu. Every man in the boats knew his job and exactly how to execute it. In just minutes, the two ribs were directly astern of the Kota Bharu. In order to avoid the wide-open area of the deck, the two ladder teams would assault from the rear of the ship. The two skilled sailors maneuvered the ribs against the ship's hull. The MRF operators raised their assault ladders and began the challenging ascent. Once on the deck, the Marines quickly assessed the situation. One lone sentry armed with an RPG was found at the rear of the ship. Without time to react, the terrorist was quickly neutralized with a controlled pair from the lead Marine's M4. The two teams aboard the Kota Bharu made their way to the port and starboard hatches they would attempt to breach. The way is now clear for the third assault team that will be delivered by air. The skilled Seahawk pilot approaches the Kota Bharu low and from the rear. Once overhead, the pilot skillfully avoids the ship's superstructure and positions the bird above the rear deck. In a well-choreographed fashion, the Marines descend the fast rope onto the deck. This team, containing the MRF commander, will breach and enter the rear hatch. The Seahawk pulls up and away and will remain on station for aerial support. All three MRF teams begin the breaching process at their respective hatches. While the breach was underway, the rear man of the starboard team spots two sentries that are responding to the commotion. A burst of inaccurate AK-47 fire is directed at the assault team. The rounds ping into the steel ship all around the Marines without effect. The rear-facing Marine places two well-aimed shots into the lead sentry. He drops immediately. The second sentry ducks behind the ship's cargo hatch. The starboard and rear assault teams complete their breach with relative ease and are prepared to make entry. The port assault team struggles with the thick hatch and will take a few more moments. The Marines of the starboard team are the first to enter the first deck. They turn immediately to their left and into one of the two engine control spaces. They are met with gunfire. With skill and precision, the room's occupant is eliminated. The rear and portside teams now also enter the first deck. The three teams methodically clear the rest of the deck, which includes the second engine control space and the ship's maintenance space. After dispatching three more combatants, the teams converge and prepare to assault up the ladder well onto the second deck. While preparing to move, the second sentry seen on the deck earlier darts into the hull and rushes the nearest Marine. With a well-trained reaction, the rear Marine draws his M45 and fires 2 rounds from the hip. The incapacitated sentry slumps to the floor. The first deck is secured without casualties. The teams now move to the second deck. It is immediately apparent that the layout is more complicated. The teams split left and right at the top of the ladder well. The first team up turns left and begins to clear the crew's cabins moving aft. The second team turns right and will clear the storage locker as well as the ship's infirmary. The first team enters the first 2 rooms and finds them empty. As they move aft, they will enter the crew's mess area. They are met with a spray of gunfire. The lead Marine is hit and is seriously wounded. The gunman immediately darts to the far side of the mess area and evades return fire. The attached SARC corpsman drags the wounded Marine into a clear room and begins assessing and stabilizing. With the wounded Marine and the corpsman out of action, the team is now at 50% strength. From the opposite side of the mess area, the second team fires and eliminates the fleeing gunman. The 2 full-strength teams continue clearing the second deck. In the final uncleared room, the Marines are again met with a spray of gunfire. Just as before, the lead Marine is hit and is seriously wounded. This time, the perpetrator is immediately dispatched with an accurate controlled pair. With the first wounded Marine stabilized, the corpsman drags the second casualty to safety and begins the combat trauma process. With the meat grinder second deck now cleared, the remaining teams consolidate and prepare for their assault of the third deck. The Marines converge on the ladder well and prepare to ascend. The first Marine crests the top. A startled gunman attempts to raise his PKM medium machine gun and deliver an offering of lead. The massive weapon is poorly suited for the close quarters engagement, and he is unable to bring the weapon to bear before receiving 2 well-placed shots to the torso. The remaining Marines quickly fan into the crew's recreational space. As the gunman falls, the medium machine gun falls to the metal floor with a clank. The Marines know how lucky they are that the untrained gunman was not able to exploit its murderous lethality. The third deck layout is much simpler than the second. Without verbal communication, the Marines split up and begin clearing the officers' cabins and the head. The head and the first 2 cabins are found to be unoccupied. Hearing a commotion from the third cabin, the Marines stack on the door and prepare for a fight. Once prepared, the Marines burst in and fan out in a textbook CQB fashion. Immediately, an exchange of lead and screaming erupts. There were 4 occupants of the room. In a split second, the Marines needed to assess what was what. 2 gunmen were immediately identified and neutralized. In the explosive chaos, a third occupant was hit. The captive chief engineer was inadvertently killed in the crossfire. The 4th occupant, who would later be identified as the captive captain, was flexicuffed and moved to a lower deck until the ship was recaptured. The final ship space is the bridge. In similar fashion as before, the Marines converge on the ladder well and prepare to make their final assault. They push upward and into the ship's bridge. There they would be met by the terrorist leader and his trusted lieutenant. These men are the most fanatic and the most dedicated to the mission. As the Marines enter the space, the gunman screams and pulls the trigger of his AK-47. Rounds impact all around the Marines. To the astonishment of everyone on the bridge, the rounds were ineffective. The Marines simultaneously release controlled pairs into the gunman. He slumps to the floor. The team then rush the man that they believe to be the leader. They close the distance quickly. He attempts to raise his rifle in defense, but the weapon muzzle is deflected by the lead Marine. The combatants are now locked in hand-to-hand combat. The Marines wrestle the weapon as the fanatic leader attempts to fire. Everyone's adrenaline is pumping. Finally, a Marine is able to free his hand. He draws his M45 pistol and discharges a round at point-blank range. The struggle ends immediately. Shortly after, the leader succumbs to his wounds. The Kota Bharu was secure and returned to its owner. The 2 wounded Marines would survive their wounds, and the Suez Canal would go unobstructed.